In the last video, I explained the role of a key supporter, and I've been a key supporter for autistic people and people with learning disabilities since 1994. If I was to try to allocate time boxes over the years, the biggest one by far would be this one, followed by this one, considerably smaller, which just leaves this one. And as you can see, it's so small I can't even fit its title in the box. However, whilst the time allocation is tiny, its importance is huge. So I will write it here in capitals: support at the job interview. Access to Work does not fund any part of the green box, I'm afraid. It can fund all sorts of things in the dark blue box, and that's why I've made these videos, of course. But will it fund the light blue box, support at the interview? For deaf people, it can. It says quite clearly on page 41 of the Access to Work staff guide that British Sign Language interpreters can be paid for by Access to Work. Interestingly, however, some Access to Work advisors have told me, including a time when I rang the 0800 number in April 2019, for autistic people and people with learning disabilities, it can't. The advisor I got through to was adamant that Access to Work couldn't fund supporting somebody with hidden disabilities at the job interview. She was wrong. On the page of the Access to Work staff guide, page 41, it says this: other types of communication support, such as advocacy, can be provided for customers with learning difficulties or mental health problems. So here's my take on all this. In 25 years, I have never even attempted to try to draw down an hour or two of funding from Access to Work to pay me to support somebody at a job interview. Perhaps I might do if employers give me 4 weeks' notice, but I'm normally working on a 4-day turnaround. And on this timescale, it simply isn't feasible. The admin time alone would be double the time I would take supporting the person at the interview. So, these videos are not going to be exploring possible Access to Work funding for the hour of job interview support. But my advice to you, the person who's applying for the job, is that if you have any doubt at all about your confidence levels at the interview, ask a key supporter to sit in with you, even if that person isn't being paid for their time to do so. Most employers are fine with it, and of course by law they are required to make reasonable adjustments at all stages of the employment experience. I showed you some footage of Lauren in the last video. Her strategy at job interviews is pretty much identical to mine. She only speaks if she needs to during the interview itself. And if she does speak, it's usually to explain something that the applicant might not understand. Or perhaps she might gently prompt them if she feels, for example, they are underselling themselves when the interviewer asks them that classic "tell me about some of your skills and qualities" question. To repeat my advice of a few minutes ago, I believe, due to administrative and time reasons, it's not worth applying to Access to Work for funding to pay for support at the job interview. But within the overall context of these videos, having a key supporter present at the job interview is crucial because the knowledge gained will provide the foundation stone upon which everything else is built, and this can be funded by Access to Work. As key supporters, we look at how we are welcomed at reception. We look at how close the start time promised is the start time honoured for the job interview, and if there is a delay, if there's an apology for this. When the interview starts, we find out pretty quickly whether the interviewer points the questions towards the person or to us. Yes, even in these so-called enlightened times, on rare occasions, some interviewers will ask me, "Can he do this?" or "How long would it take her to do that?" Let's look at some positive footage. As key supporters, we gauge how comfortable the interviewer is to take things at the person's pace. We look at how they try, even perhaps with limited success, to adapt to the standard questions they usually ask so that these sit comfortably with the person who needs to answer them. We take on board if the interviewer does need to turn to us for advice, they check first with the applicant. All this, you see, is reasonable adjustment. Where we see good practice at the interview stage, we can be pretty sure it's going to continue once the job starts. Our job is to make a judgment as to whether or not we need to apply to Access to Work for any additional help to add value to this. Whilst getting an idea of the overall feel of the organisation is really important, we also need to get some factual things recorded. The job is unlikely to work, even with the most accommodating employer in the world, if the match between the job and the person is completely wrong. So it's important that key supporters record the basic facts, because sometimes these can change in the short time between them being publicised and when the interview actually takes place. The applicant might not be able to retain this information, so it's important the key supporter does. For Lauren, as for me, the best way to do this is by using good old-fashioned notebook and pen. These are the key areas we look for: the actual tasks, the number of hours per week, whether or not it's shift work, how many hours constitute a working day or shift, and what the break pattern is for that day or shift. The lines of supervision. Who will the new employee report to, and will this person change depending on what the tasks are and what the weekly working pattern is? The basics about pay, annual leave entitlement, and what happens over the Christmas period. And how about dress code? Is there a uniform? We need to get an idea of what the expectations are about personal appearance, and can these be adjusted if needed. We need to get a feel of how the company routinely communicates with the employee. If it's shift work, for example, how do they let people know what their shifts are? Via an app, via text, via email? Once the key supporter has all the information I've just highlighted, whilst you might think it's job done, it's not quite. It's essential to grasp what training is required for the job, how it's carried out, and where it's carried out. These days, many new employees, especially in what might be considered basic skill jobs, have to complete e-learning modules covering a plethora of issues directly or indirectly connected to the job. Let's hear from Alice in her role at the Leisure Centre in East Grinstead.
E-learning is training towards your job, and you need it because it helps you to understand the company that you work for a bit better. I have help with my e-learning. This is Mel. Mel helps with my e-learning, and I find that having help really helps me because I don't feel as if I'm pressured to do it. I can do it in my own time. Typical e-learning modules are fire safety awareness, food hygiene level 2, outstanding sales, having effective conversations, cash handling.
As you will appreciate, for many autistic people and many people with learning disabilities, the e-learning issue can present serious challenges. These might not be in what's in the modules themselves, many of them are very accessible actually, but have more to do with the process and the time constraints that seem to go part and parcel with the actual learning. And when I say process, that includes things like logging in using the usual password the new employee knows by heart, but for some reason, to use the phrase immortalised by David Walliams, the computer says no. And finally, on the subject of e-learning, the key supporter needs to know whether or not the employee is paid for their time to complete the modules. Don't just assume that they are. The last area a key supporter needs to get a basic understanding of is what other training, apart from e-learning, the new employee is expected to receive. Many people with hidden disabilities can find group training sessions difficult, and if this training takes place at a venue outside the usual place of work, as sometimes happens, this can become even more difficult. If you're the person applying for a job, I'm sure you'll agree that I've made it quite clear in this video my thoughts on how important I feel it is for a key supporter to help you at the job interview. Now, you might feel you don't need this help, and that's absolutely fine. So if that's the case, my advice is use the tips that I've given key supporters in this video for yourself. I'm going to end this video by addressing key supporters again. At this stage, you might be feeling a little bit daunted as to whether or not you're going to remember all this when you accompany the person to the interview. Or perhaps you're worried that you don't have the skills to find out the answers to the questions. Don't worry, it's really not that difficult, and in almost all cases the interviewer is on your side. They want the person to do well, yes at the interview, and definitely if a job offer is made. And I've already suggested you take in a notebook to the interview, so you can have all the basic questions jotted down there. Sometimes a job offer is made there and then at the interview. When this happens, I often take the opportunity of setting up a follow-up meeting with the person who has conducted the interview, just them and me, hopefully within the next few days. I always check with the person I'm supporting that they are happy with this, of course. If I do set up a second meeting, it's almost certainly because I think I need to draw down some additional support financed by Access to Work, but I need to discuss a few issues with the employer in more detail. It will also give me the opportunity to explain to the employer a little more about Access to Work, relaxed in the atmosphere that the job offer has been made, and this is merely the reasonable adjustment bit. If I don't set up a meeting, it's because I don't think Access to Work will be needed, or I do, but not very much. Low enough that all I will need is 10 minutes communication with the employer through email or phone to set it all up and explain the administration procedures. This video has addressed most of the when whilst considering making an Access to Work application. I finish this off in the next video where I also discuss the why and the what.